So our first breakout for Shared Perspectives was the digital twin. Kelly Doyle, what did you guys accomplish in this one? Does everybody now understand how to solve this universal project ID challenge?
Yes, we conquered
maybe.
world peace in one meeting.
Darn.
You know, our conversation started at the very micro level, an individual item called the Universal Project ID, a single element that would bind all the project stuff together. Peter kind of set the stage about his idea about why we need something like this and all the benefits that could come into play across, all the different elements of the full building life cycle. And then Jeffrey gave us some perspective on some of the other work that's already been done in this area. We had our resident Darth Vader jump in and give us some perspective from the smart cities where you need to now think big. And while some of the places where Paul is working have totalitarian governments that can say you will do it this way and everybody has to comply, not really the case here in the US. And Dixon gave us a perspective from a surety standpoint. They're the ones putting the financial backing behind the plethora of projects, and there's tons of information that they need to get to have that confidence. As far afield as we went in all these different directions, it all comes back to the point where we need to be able to tie that back to an element that unifies these projects together. So while some of the folks on the call were shaking their heads and up and down and had looks on their faces of surprise, like, wow, we're really going there. It all starts with taking that first step. Welcome everyone. Let's go ahead and we know what's going on there. Let's go ahead and get things started today. It's my honor today to be moderating this roundtable where we're going to debate both the feasibility and the demand for a universal project ID. The discussion was first proposed by one of our delegates, Peter Lasensky, and it inspired what I'll call an intriguing debate on LinkedIn between Jeffrey Ouellette, Paul Doherty, some others jumped in. You can see what started with a single comment, then Jan jumped in and Jeffrey had a bunch to say, and then Paul jumped in and Anto jumped in, and everybody had lots to say about this. So Nathan and I thought this would be a great opportunity to really get some discussion around this. There's folks are always looking for a way to come around a single key to help tie things together. But on the other side of the equation, do we have any of this stuff already in place? And that was kind of what got the discussion going between folks. Some responses more passionate than others. Before we really dig into this thing and turn it over to Peter to get started, I thought I would talk about the overall objectives we've set for this session today. So how might we justify the need for a universal project ID that in ways that digitally integrate existing project registration numbers so that previous efforts combine to generate the adoption demand. So that's really what's driving our conversation today. Thought what might be a good idea next is to just is to dive in and give the folks who really started off the conversation the opportunity to dig in. So Peter, I'm going to go ahead and turn off the slide here so there's an opportunity to I guess I didn't put up the slide. So there's an opportunity to kind of introduce things and Peter, why don't you kind of get us going about what got you started on the unique project ID thoughts, and then we'll bring some other folks into the conversation as we go.
Basically, I have a construction background. I've been in construction for a long time, and a while back I started getting into the software business, and my company NoteVault, which was acquired by Bentley, we provided a service for daily reports, and many of the integrations that we did, when you integrated between Procore or whatever, there was a manual process of aligning the projects between the systems, and projects can't really be aligned because of the names alone are not enough. You need the job numbers. And so I put together, looking at how the food industry handled this, right? They had every grocery store had different numbers for their own internal systems, which they wanted to keep. And there was no way for manufacturers to correlate the same product across all these different companies. So they got together and created a universal product code and implemented that. And that enabled, from scanning and a whole host of other services where companies could all relate to the same product. And I thought it applied very well here to solve this problem for us. I've always had a passion for interoperability in construction software from the early 90s into the COSA area and the AGC XML, and before that AEC XML, and now as part of the Construction Progress Coalition. I think this is a great initiative. And I also see today that there's a chance to make a lot of movement here since there's more cloud computing and there's more APIs, and there's, I think, a different attitude. And the problem has gotten worse. We've gone from 3 silos of data with estimating, project management, and accounting, gone from those to a plethora of apps and such. And most projects have about 8 or more, 10 apps that they're using on a project. So the problem's gotten a lot worse. So I proposed this idea of a universal project identifier, and I'm going to run through just a couple slides here to go through the situation. Project stakeholders, we each have and want to keep their own project numbering system. On any given project, you have the general contractor, all of the subcontractors, the suppliers, the owners, even jurisdictions have their own number for a project, and there's no correlation between them. And they want to keep those numbering systems they have. They have people put prefixes in the job names and such, or the job numbers, so that people know more just by reading the job number. They can tell kind of who the customer is, let's say. And they want to keep that. They also want to be able to share data between their own software systems. If you have a number of point solutions, people want to do integrations, but they want to be able to share data easily between their different software systems. And also project stakeholders want to share information between companies. You might have bonding companies, you could have insurance companies, you could have suppliers and such that you want to coordinate this with. And consequently, there's a lot of waste. People want to avoid wasting time re-entering and retyping data, and that introduces potential errors, and it's a problem. And the problem being that the aligning the software projects between softwares is a manual and error-prone process, and automating it is really not possible due to the irregularities in the naming conventions. For instance, when an estimator is working and puts a name of the project in estimating software, that's not necessarily going to align with the name that someone put into the project management system, especially if they're different companies. And there is no universal project identifier that exists today. And the lack of this is really, I'm saying prevents, but I think it does really prevent the full automation of sharing project data between companies. I think this is going to be an important step. So the implication here is that it's a manual syncing process that's required before we can do integrations, we integrate with numerous other systems, and to do that, you have the manual process still is there of aligning these projects, and that's an ongoing issue. So we have to manually do this now. It introduces errors, and then you re-enter data. It's a huge, this $15 billion per year of lost productivity is a well-known study that was done that shows there's tremendous waste here in re-entry of information. And there's really not a way to identify projects between organizations right now. So I'm saying that the need here is that the universal project identifier, such that companies can automate the project syncing between their own softwares and also between organizations. So next steps, getting input, we're doing that today, getting money, developing a proof of concept and a scaling plan. I did some math here too, just to show this. If you look at this chart on the left here, peer-to-peer connections is exponential. The number of connections that need to occur by adding one more here in this chart increases this to 45 different connections. Whereas if they're all connected to one central node, then it's a linear, meaning that if there's 9 softwares, there's 9 connections. Now, this is to organize the project information. Of course, there's more that you would want to do after you have that connection. You want to share R5s or other documents, but this is I think the epicenter here of it. This is an example of organizing this to the assessor parcel number, which is my proposal, that we use the assessor parcel number, which is on all the land, and it's there because of its tax identifier, that we would create a universal project ID that links to that, and then subcontracts, non-prime would link to this universal project ID. And then what that would do is it would allow owners who have more than one APN or set more than one parcel to create a portfolio, because they would be able to see all of the construction projects and design projects they have on each of their properties individually into a whole portfolio of their projects. And we did have a prep call, and it came up that there's some existing systems that we could potentially look at to use. GS1 is a system that was evolved out of the barcode groups and some other groups that came in and became GS1, and it's a well-established group. And there was some thought about maybe having that, not having to do this from scratch, using what is available today. I think LE1, I think that's the enterprise acronym. I wasn't sure, but I think that's it. And then the IFC, there's some standards there that are adopted. And that basically we develop compelling motivators for each persona, right? There's as I said, our owners would have to be able to view portfolios. You'd have the contractors be able to have their own systems talk to each other. There's architects that could, this could be linked to other services that would provide advantages and compelling motivators for each persona to want to use this. I think in the end, is it a good idea is one thing, but then if we're going to do it, then how do we get it incorporated and implemented and adopted? And there are some strategies that we talked about that we can bring up on this call, and then build a proof of concept. If we're going to be able to leverage some of these existing systems, how can we kind of do this and start doing something to prove it out? So that's really kind of where I am there. That's all I have to share. So Kelly, awesome. I think.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you sharing the context for what generated your thought and your idea in the first place, and the work that you put into it so far to kind of walk down the path, not just drop a problem on the table and say, guys, go figure it out. So Jeffrey, can you break down for us some of the existing standards that exist, who's involved with them, at least in your opinion, why they've struggled to get adoption in the past? Because in our pre-meeting, there was a whole laundry list of stuff and lots of good and bad reasons, but I won't steal your thunder.
Yeah, well, So I appreciate that Peter brought this up. And I think it's one of those questions that was asked before. It gets asked all the time, actually. And it's interesting to see another person from another perspective bring it up. And I think when, it first came up, kind of raised my hackles, because I was like, well, here's another, this is something all over again, right? It's like, okay, we're asking the question again. So why haven't we why haven't we solved this problem? And, my experience has been, it's not that there's the lack of technology to do it or the lack of standards to do it. It's the lack of the buy-in from all the different parts of the industry to actually execute and use all the pieces that are there in place to be able to do it. So this is where we got into the discussion on LinkedIn, where I said, well, if technically the solutions are already there, the problem has been harnessing all of those technologies, or all the people who are responsible for implementing those technologies, into actually doing it, and then saying, well, here's a system. So we started to sort of break this down to say, okay, first of all, one of Peter's first ideas is, well, we have to have this ID. And I said, well, we already have the IDs. If we want to look at interoperability first, I said, we have a data interoperability standard for the building industry. It's IFC. Some of you are probably sick of hearing it, but name another one, because there's no other open formats. The IFC standard has a GUID, and that GUID is applied to everything. So, and I don't mean one GUID is applied to everything in the file. I mean, everything has its own GUID. And even the project has a GUID, and someone can assign what that GUID is a project for a project, and then, give that to everyone else. And we've shown that that's possible. Is it perfect? No. Is there work that all the vendors who are responsible for exchanging information have to do in order for it to work really, really well? You bet there is. And I know that firsthand too, from both ends. So I think from that technical perspective of the ID, it's already there. The second part of it, that we started talking about too, was, well, who's responsible for tracking all of these GUIDs? Who's responsible for creating and giving them out and, tracking them? And I said, well, first of all, the thing to remember about the idea of a GUID or a UID, either a global unique identifier or a universally unique identifier, essentially the same thing, is that their software makes use of these all the time anyways. And even in internal formats and things, they'll use UUIDs and GUIDs. And the way that they're actually created to make sure that they're globally unique or universally unique is actually use your computer. They use your chip. There's a serial number with the chip. There's the clock, the date and time. And then there's a bunch of other characters that they can derive this out of. And there's actually an ISO standard that helps you develop what a UUID is. And so that way, it's always created. So if you got a 128-bit string, it should be difficult to run out of UUIDs, especially if you're basing them on a processor of a particular computer issuing at the time. You shouldn't run into any conflicting ones. But the problem is then who's the authority then that's responsible for issuing these things and tracking them and everything? And then the other idea is why does there need to be an authority? I mean, once you've already created a unique ID, all you really need to do is have an agreed system of exchange, or you could utilize a blockchain ledger and just say, well, let's utilize a blockchain ledger that just puts all of these UUIDs out there, project UUIDs out there, GUIDs, whatever you want to call them, and people can look for them and then begin to aggregate or coordinate information based on those as that first top level sort of identifier and organizer. And then below that, the interesting thing about the way that the IFC schema is set up is you can include any number of schemas that help then further classify or identify what a project is based on those, assessment numbers in whatever jurisdictions, regardless of what they are, regardless of what the string of numbers or letters or whatever it is, doesn't matter. The system is completely independent of that GUID. And so those things can be done and utilized and maintained. And there are people who don't really give a shit about the unique identifier and really only care about the local information, and that's fine. But as I said before, I think what it gets back to then is, well, all the pieces are in place and the systems are real in place. It's just getting all the people to buy in and say, okay, well, then let's actually execute it. And, that's sort of where, I started, challenging, Peter and on all of this is that, well, okay, we're raising the question again. So then how do we get about actually solving the problem, right? Instead of inventing something new, because, I'm also a firm believer that we don't need another pizza delivery app. We don't need another food delivery app. We don't need it because, there's already 100,000 of them out there. Most of them suck. A few of them are okay. A couple of them might be spectacular. But why reinvent the wheel when all the things are in place to use? And especially if we can base them on existing standards that are already in place or existing technologies that are already in place and can move forward.
Those are all excellent points, and a good progression in discussion. Right? Here's your problem. Here's some suggestions. Here's some tight industry knowledge on specifically how we can advance that and where the challenges are. But let's go the other end of the spectrum. Darth Vader, I think a thing or two about smart cities. What the universal project registration benefits either the city government or some big mega corporation. Either way, it feels a bit like a top-down play. How do you see it playing out?
Yeah, I do find this entire discussion disturbing, but we do have some real. I can't tell you how annoying that was wearing that. Sorry. But if you don't agree with me, you do get the lightsaber. So, Jeff, you're really starting to hit the right points, right? The force is definitely strong within you, but Peter also brings up something that we've had to address both in China and in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia, specifically on a project that we're working on right now called NEOM, where totalitarian governments are awesome about pushing a schema like that down. Do people use it? Sometimes not. But the idea is that it's a top-down type of strategy. When I think where Jeffrey's going with this is that there are definitive ways of moving forward about coming from the bottom up as well, from the community, because a standard is only standard if it's used. When the AIA came out 10 years late with their Cadlarian guidelines, it was like, what? We're only into BIM and you're now publishing Cadlarian guidelines. Thank you very much. We don't want to get back into that mode. And I think that, albeit that Peter's idea is a correct one, I'm not sure if it is, it needs to be discussed as a community, which is why I thought this opportunity was good because of this one big thing. As we start seeing the financial communities starting to be again transformed in a way where, when I was growing up, going to the bank was a thing that you just did. Now, if you're not doing it online or at least at an ATM, you're not really banking. They're going now to the next level, which is into this world of a decentralized world. I thought when Jeffrey brought up the term blockchain, there's a lot of, it's kind of like saying smart cities. It's a big bucket. But the way that we're working about linking our digital assets in NEOM directly to the physical asset, not just as a digital twin, but as a metaverse. And with the recent announcements of initiatives like the federated metaverses that NVIDIA is suggesting with this Omniverse, we are already getting our unique IDs from that. Follow the money, because that's where actually everything is going to focus in on. I thought that, during our side discussions prior to this meeting, I thought that, having the people that were involved with Surety, bonding and that type of thing. I thought that that was great to have that voice, because we come at it from high finance. How do you actually take a $500 billion project and make sense out of it, which is NEOM, right? Many different types of projects, but they all have to coalesce. So I don't know how many projects are going to be out there like these giga projects, like in NEOM, as opposed to the guy, who just wants to, do his work in his local neighborhood here in Memphis, Tennessee. There's different ways of slicing this pie, but I'm not sure that it all comes down to the one ring, that unique identifier, when we should learn from how the financial community is moving along into things like smart contracts, right? Where there will be unique identifiers. I would pay close attention to what Chris Anderson is doing with the AIA contract documents. There are going to be amazing changes to where forms and actual pieces of paper that were contracts move into a digitized and data-centric world. So I'm not sure if Peter's idea is not too late. I think it should be discussed. I just don't know if it's an initiative that I personally can get behind here in the United States. If this was in KSA in Saudi Arabia, if this was in China, I'd be 100% behind it because I know it'd be implemented. To Jeffrey's point, I think why hasn't this happened before? And I think it's going to be led by a reimagining of the financials. Knowing that fungible tokens are a real deal, not the NFTs, but the FTs that could be securitized. That's where the magic is. Because now when you're on a token, you now have those unique identifiers that follow that stack, right? And I think that we can take the lead from that and build upon that, rather than building it and saying, hey, we built it. Does anyone want to use this thing?
Excellent points. Dixon, you're coming at this from a surety perspective, and it seems like that's another project stakeholder that needs to see a lot of data across a lot of projects. How do you see all this shaking out?
Well, I would say two things. One, surety is very heavy in the public sector, and the public sector is very hard to move anywhere. They've got laws and statutes that deal with procurement and whatnot. They just don't move very fast. But what's kind of exciting is that the grid, the smart grid, used to be monopoly run by the utilities for years and years and years, and it's now breaking free. And there's a whole new market segment building solar and clean energy that doesn't have the same legacy that it has to move around. And they're looking at better, faster, cheaper, and they're not adverse to digital or next generation. So we've been working with the DOE to try to do just that, identifiers. And I noticed you started your talk with something from NIST. NIST is the National Institute of Standards and Technology, and they actually put out a guide on data interoperability for the entire grid for the entire country every 3 or 4 years. And I participated on a couple of them. They just published it in February. And there again is another entity that if they said, all right, we're going to use the LAI or we're going to use, GS1, that would buy in, because a lot of people are using that as a reference guide. And so I guess my point is, in the energy space, because you can't take everything all at once, the energy space is trillions of dollars. Secretary of Energy just described the work as 23 trillion, if you can imagine it. No, 23 trillion, renovating the entire grid that they're talking about. That's a lot of contracts. And if you get the DOE to start saying, look, I need to put an identifier on this, there's enough there to capture enough people to where it would be a movement that would be hard to stop and it would definitely infect the other market share, the other market segments. So I'm happy to share. I'll put a link in the chat for the NIST guideline if you want to look at it. But the energy space is a great place for this project to find a home as a catalyst.
Fantastic. So I think we've.
Oh, yeah,
yeah, go ahead.
So I got a couple of questions, if you don't mind.
Yeah,
Can I ask a
definitely.
couple questions? Jeff, this one is to you. Are there, what are the fields available for a UUID? Is there, assuming there's a text for the name of the whatever it is, is there a schema available for what that contains?
Yeah, and so I sent those links out to the group. Our small discussion earlier.
Okay.
So
Sorry.
if you look at the implementation guide for IFC,
Yeah.
there's a standard which is used currently for encapsulating that 128-bit string. Unfortunately, it's a bit when it was first created, it was created under the assumption that there were limits to memory. And so it's not based on the actual ISO standard for creating GUIDs. So we're trying to change that for the next version of IFC. But the other part of it is that you have to look at the schema, and the way the schema says is that every object class that's listed has a GUID. So if I go into a project, every element that I see in a building has a GUID. Every property of every element has a GUID. And I can begin to look for things and track things through that. What IFC and what Building Smart has also done is said, you know what, we can standardize and say that for every column, for the strength property of every column, we can actually give it one GUID that everybody can share. And then when you go out to look for, say, a product and you want to specify a particular strength of concrete, you can go and look for that, and then they can, through the data dictionary, can compare and say, yeah, my strength of concrete matches the specification. I know it's, and this is the proper place for it, and this is how I'm going to identify it. So I don't have to worry about, human nomenclatures that can work across languages, it can work across, markets and all of that kind of stuff. So that's just an example of how it's used there. I think if another way to look at it, another link that I included before, was the work that GS1 has been doing for a long time, right? And GS1 is in the business of essentially tracking things, identifying things and tracking things. And so if you look at how they present themselves, there's some different levels of doing this. And I'm gonna share my screen quick so you guys can see this idea. So this idea of the global language of business is that, there's the idea to identify things, and it's anything, right? I mean, it's companies, entities, it's not just products and all those kinds of things. And then the idea of capture is, well, how do you show, what does the name tag look like, right? And then there's the idea of sharing the data exchange. And so, a long time ago, GS1 developed this system that essentially says, well, we can create barcodes for products so that, every time you go to the grocery store, now nobody has to really, well, still sometimes you have to key in the barcode, but everything's based on a barcode. And when you go to scan, that's how the register recognizes what it is. It goes back in inventory, lets inventory know that that has been, removed from the store, and blah, 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 blah. And then that barcode feeds into an entire ecosystem for distribution and delivery and storage and manufacturing and everything. And, when Building Smart and GS1 were talking about it, GS1 was like, well, we could essentially do the same thing in the building industry. I mean, there are already a lot of products in the building industry that already follow this whole pattern, because they're already products and they already have barcodes on them. But then the question was, well, how do you take that to the next level? And taking it to the next level, and they talked about this really in Europe. Skanska was one of them, and there's a couple of other Swedish and Scandinavian companies that said, well, why couldn't we use this idea of the GTIN and apply it to buildings, right? Apply it to projects, and essentially use the same system in order to go. And again, it doesn't matter whether it's a company or a project or campus or, whatever those may be, but that number gets applied to all of them. And I think what the interesting thing is that one of the demos that GS1 showed us in a recent Building Smart meeting was that then those numbers could actually be used as a part of a internet URL system to begin to then link information that might be a part of that project, object, company, or whatever, to whatever you need to link it to. So say I'm an insurer and I need to have a link back to this project. Well, I have the security number, and if that security number can be captured in a URL, which it can, then all I have to do is click on that URL that takes me to the information for that product, right? And that can live anywhere. I mean, it's really dependent on who chooses to host the information, whether it's, it could be a cloud, service provider like a BIM 360 or a Trimble Connect or, Bentley, what's the Bentley version?
Connect.
Yeah. So, these systems could have those things. And then through this idea of a blockchain ledger, they could all then begin to coordinate each of these things based on that project
Yeah,
ID or that
right.
ID. So
that way you could use it on blockchain on certain projects and not on others.
And then you just have to have, this idea of getting the industry to agree to spin that up and run it and, begin to buy into it. And then, like you said, and then as Paul said, people who want to buy into it can buy into it and they want to. If they don't want to, they don't have to. You could see a groundswell. But I think, again, kind of goes back to this key component that says, well, but if I can't get the vendors to do it, then how am I going to get it done? And the vendors aren't going to do it unless there is a need that their users, a majority of their users, there's a threshold that has to be passed for then the vendors to say, yes, we're going to invest the effort in order to make this actually happen. And my experience in the software side of things in our industry has been that is usually where the biggest problem is crossing that gap between, well, what do the users think they need and want, and the vendors actually, implementing something. And it's not out of spite and it's not out of malice. It's usually just this huge disconnect of figuring out what does that look like and what does it mean?
Well, it really comes down to every company has priorities, and no matter how big a company is, there's always limited resources.
Yeah.
But I do think that since the general propensity of software OEMs now is to have an ecosystem and more of an open architecture and allowing people to integrate, it would help them, and all these integrations would be easier because of it. And I think that there is, I think in this situation, there's really something in it for everybody, and that's a good step to help us, have motivation, around the board on it. I have a question for you, Paul. In terms of this, mentioning that the Omniverse, right, which is really an awesome thing. You said they have a system now for, creating common numbers. I was wondering if you could tell me what that is and how it works and who does it, and is it really does it really exist, and could we use that or leverage that, or is it can we get more information about that?
I'd love to bring our partners Epic Games into this conversation, actually, as we continue along. They're doing it right now for Hollywood. What they're doing is that they're using right now a thing called Stagecraft Volume, which is literally a stage set made up of 40 foot by 40 foot with ceiling to floor monitors, including the ceiling. And it's how they're shooting The Mandalorian, which is saving upwards of 85 to 90% of post-production costs because there's no green screens. What they're doing is they're using the Unreal Engine to actually now promote digital assets where you now have light, shadow, all these things, reflection with actors literally in a virtual space. So they're no longer acting to a green screen where all the post-production costs used to be. Well, the reason why that's important is because they need to align everything almost like a grip, on the old stage sets, where one scene ends and another begins, because they are no longer saying, okay, let's go to the next sound stage for going on the spaceship or being on a planet. They literally hit a button, next, and they're ready to go. Changes how you direct, how you produce shows, which is why Disney announced about 3 months ago, that they have 480 different Star Wars movies coming out in the next 2 years. I mean, the volume that they can do is incredible. I think we have a lot to learn from that, because what they're doing is that they're aligning one view of a digital universe to another, and they're making it seamless. I can find out more about how they're doing it and what are those triggers? What are those milestone data sets that need to align so that they can have an omniverse, because it's literally what they're creating here. They'll be using the same stage set for the fourth phase of the Marvel comics, or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, starting with Captain America 4. And what's cool about Epic is that they are really focused with the Unreal Engine now about our industry. So I think the throughput, where we don't have to reinvent some things, but maybe learn and then enhance how it could really work for us, could be very special.
You know, it's interesting. There's been a lot of, in our world, doing daily reports. It's applicable to making movies. We had the same thing. It's very similar. It's a creative process, but somebody has to actually get out and do something for real. And there's a lot of alignment between the production of movies and construction projects, and for software development as well, for that matter. And I think we could totally learn from them. Yeah.
And vice versa, right? Because I think the discipline that we have to have, they need to also get into play from going from movie to movie, because movies now are not a one-shot deal. Even if the actor dies, like in Black Panther, they're going on with Black Panther 2. I mean, it's now a franchise, which I think we can also learn about, the similarities of a movie, right? Because on a major project, you will never get every subcontractor, every designer, every engineer that was on the last project to come to the new one. And these projects are $100 million pieces, right? Very, very similar. So I think those discussions, these collisions of industries, we can learn from their digital transformation, so that, again, getting back to, the reality of how do we start making those steps in the metaverse so that we can create a federation. NVIDIA threw it out there. They have a very narrow and proprietary way that they think that they're going to go about it. We have to pay attention to them because they're kind of running everything graphically in the world right now. But I think that, what I'm excited about is knowing that we've worked on so many different projects with digital twins, metaverses, right? And how they're now transforming from the design, construction, and delivery tasks, that then the digital twin is being, and I'm starting to see it, it's not a big thing yet, but the idea of taking that model and then being able to take the taxonomies and shift them from, like, let's say, master format, omniclass, into, a more facilities and operational role. But that, again, we're still narrowly focused on what that means. I would challenge every designer, or people that work for designers, architects, engineers, whatnot, is that the expanse of what you're building should be more valued in the digital realm, because of what's happening with these gaming engines like Unity, like Unreal. And it's not just about fly-throughs. We're talking about any type of data now can be flowing through our digital assets, where the value of the digital asset over time will be more than the physical real estate itself. That's exciting, because now you can start to sell these things as transactions on what? Exactly what Jeffrey was talking about, the blockchain.
Yeah.
So I think we're entering a threshold that takes the digital twin into a different type of discussion, where we're no longer just focused in on the digital asset that stays put. Hopefully our buildings don't move too much, right? But that static look at digital twinning, we should now be also looking at vehicles and people and their movement through that space that really start to create, Ready Player One.
And I think, what I was trying to build on too, Peter, is this idea of, why create something when something already exists? Why create something new when something already exists? And the other aspect I come from, especially from the building smart perspective, is, and the standards community, is to say, as a software developer, it's easier if I have one standard to deal with than one for each different country. And so, part of the effort that we try to push through ISO is to say, here's an international organization that ensconces standards, right? And you can choose whether to follow them or not. But then people put value on the ability to actually use and follow those standards, right? And so ISO has one for creating UUIDs. ISO has one for blockchain. ISO has one for doing, accounting methods. ISO has one, IFC is an ISO standard. There's all of these things that occur that says, listen, why should I have the Norwegians figure it out one day, the Chinese figure it out another day, the Americans try to figure out another day. And it's like, guys, get over yourselves and just use what's already there. And if you're using what's already there and you find out, oh, it's missing something or isn't quite perfect, that doesn't mean you go start something new. That's the beauty of the way that the standard system is set up at ISO or CEN or BSI or even ASTM and ANSI, is that they're not immutable, is that they can be revised as needed in order to meet the demands of the current time or the foreseeable future. And so we have to build on those things, because I think, you know, the sort of more dystopian vision I have of the computer industry today is that everybody's trying to reinvent something that's already there, and there's no need for it. It's a waste of so many resources and time and effort, when all it is saying, oh, well, what can I reuse and just make, you know, do it better and reuse it better? And what are the things that are in place that I, you know, almost like Legos, you know, put together to create a better model or a better system, right?
Jeff, on that vein, is there, you know, at least in, you know, my vision, that we would take that universal, you'll call it a UUID or what have you, to link that to an APN number? That doesn't seem like that would be something that would be done in the system that's there. It would take some other system to organize this so that they would, an owner could look at all their projects across all their.
Well, again, I think that that's just a matter of establishing a protocol that says, well, I'm going to take X and I'm going to equate it to Y. Yeah. And here's how I'm going to do it. And I think what I'm trying to get at is, if within the building industry, we say, listen, you know, we have a schema that is able to semantically describe the entire built environment, and it has the ability to layer identification, then everybody utilizes it. I mean, you know, Bentley Systems utilizes it, the Autodesk universe utilizes it, you know, all the different big players, they already utilize this. So then the next question is, well, they utilize it to a very simple degree. How can they utilize it to the next level, right? And add this, you know, and put this additional value in. It's like, I could go to Kelly, you know, we've talked about this a bit. It's like, well, why would Kelly's company, why would Kelly's platform want to understand IFC? I said, well, you know, you don't have to have a model. You don't have to import the model. All you have to do is import the data. And if the data says, here's your project identifier information that contains its unique identifier, and then all of the other things, whether it's, you know, local jurisdiction stuff, physical address, geolocation, all that stuff comes in there. It's all within that same package. Fine, that's all you read and you use, but then you can connect it to everything else, because once you're able to read that, everybody else is also reading the same information. And again, that's why I think it gets into this idea of, it's more of a process systems and behavior problem than it is the technology issue.
So then let me throw something over here, Jeffrey, to you.
Mm-hmm.
What happens then when we introduce this emerging delivery system that seems to be catching fire of offsite construction through DFMA? Because now you're taking the idea of the word project and inserting the word product, right? Which is how you're talking about cycle times. And now, Peter, a lot of your initial ideas of, you know, taking the, the retail side of things through UPCs and SKUs become real, where the actual building itself is a product. Now, all of a sudden, I can get behind that because it's a different business model. Right, the people that are exploring DFMA right now, the big boys, you know, amazing to watch what Turner's doing with offsite, right, where they're really making a pivot. This becomes a real question, especially with the lack of labor, and the tsunami of an infrastructure bill coming down the road over the next year or two. How does our industry respond to that? And should we be looking at product rather than project? It becomes a really interesting question about where now all the things you were talking about, Jeffrey, really now start to become real.
And that's why I think the GS1 connection is so interesting, is because they already have that figured out, right? And if, you know, rather than Turner, I would say go to Northern Europe, go to Norway, go to Finland, they've been doing this for 15, 20 years already now, or
In
longer.
terms of a project identifier, are you
In terms of this whole idea of productizing, of DFMA, of,
see.
prefabrication, of,
Yeah.
delivering a project completely different than what we think of
Yeah.
here.
Yeah.
And, they've been doing that for a lot longer than we have in the States. And so I think that's why, it's interesting when you, like I said, I always look at it from that broader scope. This is if I look at what's happening in different places, some people already have this sort of figured out, but they just need to get everybody to buy into it in order to scale and really matter. And I think that's what gets into, like in Dixon's part of the industry, is you have the banking and insurance industries, they already have these systems of how do I identify something in a database, right? That is hundreds of thousands of entries of projects and insurance and all that. That system's already in place. And I bet you if you look at it closely enough, and especially if you look at the difference between what a bank does and what a public blockchain ledger does, there's really no difference. The systems are already there. The systems use them. And as much as they like to think their systems are different, they're much more similar than they are different. And so then it's just saying, okay, well, what standard do we use then to coordinate this, not just on the technology level, but also from the human perspective, so everybody knows what they're connecting to and buying into and having an assurance that it works. Because what you don't want is you don't want a system that says, well, I need a human to figure out the taxonomy in order to decide what to give a number, name, or whatever to. It'll never work. For billions and billions of projects and products, it won't work. You just let the machines do it. And so that's why you say, okay, well, if we have the technology that do it, we have the standards that the technology can to follow to do it, then we just have to, as humans, buy into those pieces to then, connect all the things properly. And then make the demands on the software, companies to say, just make it connect. Because they did it for travel, right? They did it for products, general product industry. Travel, think about it. For the longest time, and banking's been doing it for a long time. Telecommunications does it now, right? So, we don't, in the construction industry, we don't have to invent anything. We're not that unique as an industry.
Everybody thinks they are, right?
Yeah,
I haven't talked to a construction or design organization yet that doesn't think they have the secret sauce that rules the world. So
I'm not special.
So here we've had an amazing discussion around the state of the possible. I'd like to open it up to some of the other folks on the line here to ask questions or make suggestions around, what do you guys think now that you've heard this? What's the ideal type of project to get started? Is it an infrastructure, highway, residential city permits, data centers, smart grid? Who has to put skin in the game? I mean, if you look at a retail example, there's SKUs and UPCs and everything, but Amazon puts theirs sticker on top of everybody else's, right? And that's how they control their universe. So I'm going to drop that little grenade on the floor and let folks pick it up and see where it goes. So who's our first
I'll address that. First of all, Costco has their own product number, but it doesn't matter because they're still behind that, the universal product code, right? The manufacturers are doing it. So I don't think it's any different than, that's their little thing. And they did that because they wanted shorter numbers and such, and companies may want to do that as well. They should be able to do whatever they want when it comes to the facing, customer facing.
When you think the universe is simply your own galaxy, then you can do that. It's when you realize that there's a lot of galaxies and a lot of stars and more, then that's where it begins to get really complicated.
That's why I love totalitarian governments.
Yeah.
Including the empire, right?
You can deal with the devil all you want, Paul.
Simon, you have the benefit of, who was jumping in?
Oh, I was going to say, this is Dixon. I could share one project that kind of leads to this. NREL, National Renewable Energy Lab under the DOE, is converting 47,000 authorities with jurisdiction who issues a permit into a single permit across the nation. Trying to bring every one of those different stakeholders. Of course, the permit process includes the contractor, the finance, and everything. So it's really quite unique, and they're pushing that through to try to make it available. And it's just coming out now. So it's
This might be
successful.
able to help that, right? If they had, there's a case where all the jurisdictions have their own numbers, numbering it
They
as
do.
well. And if you wanted to, you could organize this to one central number. It could all be coordinated easily.
Interesting. Simon, I'm interested to get your thoughts coming from the UK. That standards are a lot. They've been in place for a while. Folks are using them, kind of like Jeffrey's been talking about in Norway and the other Scandinavian countries. Are you seeing any examples of this in your neck of the woods?
So on my end, so I'm in France. I'm currently in Paris. So I have to be honest that on that end, I don't know much, and this is where the discussion today was very enlightening, because it was really taking some points I've never really thought of. Maybe if I may ask a question to a point that was quite interesting to me was, Paul, you did mention that the value of the digital asset over time might supersede the physical one. I was wondering if you could maybe elaborate a little bit on that point.
Sure. Yeah, I can give a direct example. So Epic Games also owns and operates the world's #1 game called Fortnite. What we're proposing, and we're well down the road right now, is that for the 7th season drop, which will happen in about 10 months, we're going to unleash our photorealistic Unreal Engine-based cityscapes as part of the V-Bucks skins that kids can buy. So you're no longer flying into Fortnite Island. You could be flying into downtown Pittsburgh or Times Square or Paris and have your adventure, but you have to pay for it. And V-Bucks is making billions of dollars right now for Epic Games, mostly from my son. Okay, and what's cool about it is that every time that they say, okay, I want to fly into New York, we split those profits, right? And all they are static elements, but they're now being made alive inside of the context that we're licensing it out for that particular game. That's just one example. Another example, and so you can imagine over time, Times Square is Times Square. We don't own it, but we own the rights because we have both a fungible token for that streetscape. In that context, that will make money for us. But to get back to the individual building itself that we own, we're putting up a virtual reality theme park in Qingdao, China. And what we're doing is we had to change our pro forma, because in order for us to get to construction, we have to design and deliver at least beyond, construction documentation, but we're doing it in the model, which means that we have a series of this theme park, right, of digital assets that in December of 2022, we're going live with the virtual reality theme park. People can go into it, they can experience it, that they can get excited because we're going to have Fortnite Island as a land, almost like, Adventureland, Tomorrowland at Disney. We're doing that with games. We have Tencent involved, Epic and whatnot. Now, because it's opening up 2 years earlier, my construction loan drops 65%. So I had to redo all my pro formas because we're opening up in December of 2024. So imagine now that my digital assets are making me revenue. Those digital assets now are revenue producing before the actual physical actually begins. So we're starting to track that building may be worth $5 million inside our theme park. But guess what? I've already made $20 million in revenue off my digital asset. Things start to get interesting then, because a fungible token is actually securitized, and the digital hedge fund that we're using to make this happen is SEC sanctioned. So it's a Security Exchange Commission real general ledger, right, with a token, which means that the digital asset, because it's tied to a physical asset, we're starting to see the beginnings of a digital currency, central bank digital currency, not based on stupid Bitcoin, but based on real estate. Mm-hmm. This is now the real challenge now is, are we looking at real estate? Maybe we need a different prism, that we now can be a currency-based system that's totally expansive, because the dollar used to be put onto the gold standard, right? Now it's just on the good faith of the US government. Mm-hmm. Well, Bitcoin is also limiting its resources, right? What, there's 21 million coins now, and they're going to cap so that it becomes more valuable, just like gold. With real estate, there's only a certain amount of land in the world, but the digital equivalent of that is ever expansive. So it becomes a really interesting way of looking at currency, looking at the way that we can start to value the digital asset beyond just knowing that it's going to be a nice tool for the facility manager to use.
And it depends. So I agree with Paul, and I think Japan's probably another example of this. If you look in Japan and you look at the way that they build in places like Tokyo, the building is never as valuable as the land that it sits on, because
Amen.
Tokyo will rebuild itself in a couple of decades. Like there's certain parts of Tokyo, they look at a building and they say, this is not valuable enough for this piece of property. I cannot generate enough revenue with this 7-story building. I need a 15-story one. And then 15 years later, they'll look at that 15-story building and go, no, I can go up to 30 and the economics of it are far better. So this idea of what's fungible and what's not also has an impact on the value of something. And it also has an impact on who the value is to, right? Is it the person that is the owner of the asset or the token or the product, or is the person who's trying to buy it to make use of it somehow, right?
That's correct.
And these are the things we haven't really negotiated well enough in the building industry, is we seem to put value where there is no value. And then we don't put enough value on the things where there is an enormous amount of value in it. And, and it totally escapes us. It's, it's like, what's more important, the bottom line cost of opening a building or its operating cost over 40 years? Well, everybody with a brain will tell you it's 40 years. But everybody who wants to get in and out will tell you, no, it's whatever that opening cost is. And like,
So, Jeffrey, so at the AIA, when I was active in that hellhole, it was one of these things that
Amen, brother.
where I brought up the music industry.
Mm-hmm.
If architects and engineers were smart, you're creating the digital DNA of the built environment, okay? Yet you give it away as a serviceable contract, right? Now, what would happen if you said and changed the terms of the AIA documents and said that I own the publishing rights to this, the same way that songwriters make money not on performing and not on record sales or drops on Spotify. They make it on the publishing rights, right? So the first architectural firm that figures this out is going to actually start the process of changing the economics in a huge way to being a service contract rather than a deliverable contract that has a finite time.
And I think we've tried that in the US for a long time with plan books and things like that, and only at the scale of residential, and it hasn't really worked well because architects are terrible at those businesses and figuring out those models. But I think it'd be more important to scale that up, and I think that freaks out everybody else in the industry. And I agree. I think when you move to this idea of the values in the service, so how do you do better service than everywhere else, especially if you strip away, as Kelly said, what's the secret sauce? Well, just you don't have secret sauce. Okay. What is secret is your competency and your ability to meet schedules and even, drive, the aesthetic concerns that may be unique, but to deliver things on time, on budget, all of that, those should be expectations that everybody has to ultimately meet. And so there's no extra value to that. The extra value is how well you execute those things, right? And we aren't there yet. And it's sad because every other industry is.
I got to put up. I got to put up my hand, guys. There's about a minute and a half left, and I just want to take a second to thank everybody for participating. I know we had a limited number of people going back and forth here, but I think what ended up happening is we started out at this very micro level of a single identifying code for a project, and then we went wide. I mean, we're talking but it shows the importance of the taxonomy here, right? If you can't relate all this stuff back to a point of origination, if there's not a way to create relationships between data, then there's dumpster diving, right? It's how do you find your stuff, right? I think we've heard that term before. From somebody on the line. So it's hugely important to have these discussions and understand the state of the possible, which may motivate somebody to put the skin into the game to get the ball rolling. And I think these conversations are going to go a super long way. So again, thank you for our subject matter experts who, Peter, thank you for starting the conversation
Yeah, thanks, Peter.
You open the
everybody
can of
else for
worms,
jumping in.
dude.
Well, I'm going to run with this. I did put my email address in the chat. I would like to invite you,
4
Jeff,
seconds.
and Paul and Dixon to do some offline discussions, get a little deeper on this. Are you guys open to it?
Yes.
If you are, email me. I know you guys have your emails, but anyone else who wants to be part of it, let me know.
I sent a
think
bunch of
it's,
links out before. Go through those
Yeah, I'll look at
emails
that stuff. I will.
from that
I'll
week
look at
of
that.
from the day and the day after
Yeah.
our setup meeting, because there's a lot of things that sort of connect all of these dots. I think the one that continues to frustrate me and frustrates everybody except for Paul, because he doesn't have to worry about it, is how do I get all these different people to work together? Because you just have somebody that says, well, you're going to work together because
You need one of these.
Yeah.
You need one of these.
And to me, I think that's, everybody kind of nods their head. They all understand this is, how do you get people to agree to work together? And what is the thing that prevents them from doing
There
it?
has to be motives. I mean,
Yeah.
There has to be something in it for people, or else, you don't want to have to make them do it. They have to want to do it. And that's the difference, I think. We got to figure that out.
Yeah. And sometimes,
Nicholas, you want to say something? You
Yeah.
haven't been said anything. You seem like you got something to say. Nicholas Tilford.
No, I'm just agreeing with everyone very much. So I've been a fan of Jeffrey's previously in other conversations about digital twin environments, and I'm actually on a job site right now where I feel all of the pains all too often and all too clearly. I can tell you that I think from my perspective, just in BIM VDC work, we're still trying to, even from our high tech clients, we're still trying to get digital technological buy-in on just digital twins or building information modeling. So it's still very much
the tactics that we use in this course are tactics that were used in the military. I train professional fighters on the side, and we use them for training the fighters, but we've converted them into a corporate friendly environment. And so there, in my opinion, there is no short term. It's being eyes and ears and letting them talk. But over the long term, it's about building the ability to train your brain to perform under pressure. That's
on that note. That was awesome. Chad, this is definitely the longest we've just gone, and I think everyone's just mesmerized. Anybody that came on midstream that was like, so you want me to put you in your breakout room? They're like, no, I'm good. I'm just going to stay here in mental health.